Recording has started. Today is July 19th, 2013, and we are having two webinars again today, and we're starting off with Glenn Rathke. In his Imagine with WX series, number 7 already, and this is webinar number 77 for WX Live. And following this, we'll have Wolfgang, and the topics are here. Glenn's going to cover, well, I'll let you.
Well, thanks. Morning, guys. Well, we're going to go back and revisit our parent-child records here. And if you have my training, you've got this example, and it should be up to date. It's our joined tables that we're doing by row selection. So we can actually see a parent-child. And let me start running this, and I'll explain what's happening, and we'll go look at the code, because now what we've also done is we've wrapped adding the parent and the children in a transaction frame. So let's run this window. And you'll see I've got my list here. I will add a person. So it's just a regular maintenance form like we normally have. And then I can add a phone number. You'll notice that we now drop down with the maintenance form here. I'm just keeping it all in the same form. So let's put in cell, and that is 555 1212. Say OK. We'll add another one, and we'll do that as home, and that's 555 1213. We'll add that. As we're adding these children records, they are in a memory table, so they are not written to the database yet. So when I do an OK, we will now write all those records. Here is our record. I just select this. On the right, we have our 2 phone numbers. Let's go and edit that. And what I've now also done is, if you delete this, say yes, and I don't know if you can see it well or not. Let's see. You can see that the lines got strike through on the home and the 555 1213. I'm doing that so because we've not committed these records yet, and so you'd at least know that that record is going to be committed. When we say OK, we will go and save that record. You'll notice that that one phone number has now disappeared that we were deleting. So let's go look at that code. And that's all in the You People table here. And it all happens under the OK button. Well, the first thing I need to know is when I'm going to be doing a transaction is what connection am I using? Because SQL transaction on line 14 here, that requires a connection. So I grab what it is because it's the people table that I'm working with. It's also the phones table. So what this is kind of implying is whatever tables we're working with have to be within the same connection. It'll be the same database. Doesn't matter if it's a SQL Server, MySQL, Hyperfile Classic, Hyperfile Client Server. They all work under the transaction processing, which is really nice. So that's the first thing I do is I grab whatever so I know the connection I'm using. And the reason this works well here in our examples is if those of you have the training, you know that we can switch between Hyperfile Classic, so you're running them on your local machine, or SQL Server up on a server somewhere in the cloud. So if I make that switch at the very beginning of the program, I know what connection I'm working with. So then we start the transaction, and you'll notice that I'm doing the transaction outside of the when exception in. And this is a new type of air trapping also for us in our examples here. So let me quickly just go on to when exception in is when exception in, and the next code that follows is just your normal code, your regular code that you would be writing. Then we have a do portion. So when there's an exception in all that code above, this is what we do. And so you'll notice that we're going to roll back our transaction. Our normal code or regular code that we've got here, we've got the commit at the very end. So what I did is I decided to keep SQL transaction, the start of that, I decided to keep that out of the when exception in, because if it couldn't start a connection, then it's going to try and do a rollback. Well, there's really no sense in doing a rollback if you haven't done a start. So I kept it outside of the when exception in. And if there is an issue there, then our automatic error trapping will handle that case. Okay? So we start the transaction, we get in our structure of one exception in, and I'm checking to do, if I'm in creation mode, I know I'm going to be creating a new record. If I do, it's an HAdd. Otherwise, I'm going to do a modify. And then the next thing that I need to do is I need to loop through that memory table that we have. And that's what we're doing right here. And so we do for each row of the table people phones. If my column of the people foreign key is 0, in other words, that is a phone number that I just added to that table, so it will have a value of 0. And if it is, then that record actually gets added to my phones table. Otherwise, if it's not got a foreign key of 0, in other words, we're in editing an existing person that has phone numbers, and we've got the foreign key of the sysid in phones tied back to the primary key of sysid in people. Otherwise, what we do is, and if the column's been touched, so I don't want to go update any existing phones if I have not edited them. So that's the only thing that I'll do is if I edit them or if I delete them. So if the col is touched, and that's just a column I have in the table that I set to true. If it's true, then I do an hreadseek first on the phones using the primary key and using the value for my table. And then I set my description and my phone number. And here, this is what I had leveraged or been able to capitalize on. When we deleted the phone number, you notice that the font was strike out. Well, that also gives me the attribute. I can tell if I'm going to delete a phone number. And if that row actually is struck out, if it's not, I just modify that phone number. Otherwise, I go and I delete that phone number. Okay? And then when I keep cycling through this table, row by row by row, and when I'm finished, I do a transaction commit. Okay, so that just sends everything to the database and puts everything as one transaction. So you won't have inconsistent data. It's not that I would add a person and I could only add one of 2 phone numbers and not know what happened. It's either the whole thing or it's nothing. Let's go back to the delete button on here. And so what I
don't understand the do thing. When does that kick in? Can you go back there?
Okay, I was going to go back. Nope, I can go back. When that kicks in is anytime there would be an error up here, writing, reading, or deleting a record from the database.
That's the only time it goes to that do.
So if there's a, yes, so it's whenever there's an exception in this following code here.
Oh, I see. So it's tied to that. Okay.
Right. So if it can't commit the transaction for whatever reason, first of all, if it can't write the record, either a person, or it can't modify a phone, or it can't delete a phone, it will then do it will commit that transaction. And also, if there's an error in the commit for whatever reason that is, then it does the rollback.
Well, I mean, that looks so automatic. It's not, I mean, if you looked at that from coming from another world, that's kind of like, whoa, that just kind of falls through and does it, huh?
Can I just?
Yeah, it does.
Then can I just?
Now, I had started looking.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
From another point of view, when the exception happens, is like as if you have if H error and then say break. It's nearly like a loop out of a break. You know, break out of the exception and do the loop. So which is quite nice. You don't have to have, in another language we used to have a loop, and then every time you test for error, if there's an error, you would then set the flag or something like that, and then break out of that loop, and then check if there was an error, then do the rollback.
Right.
This is much more
Right.
cleaner, makes your code really easy to read. So it's like a
Yeah,
Well,
well,
and
it's
it's,
too clean.
it's like something's missing.
and it's handling more than just if there's an H error.
That's right.
Say you've got some other error that's happening within this
Mhm.
code here, and it knows that it can process, so it captures all the
That's it.
errors.
Very
Yeah,
clean.
Well, see, I
it's
was
very
looking,
clean.
yeah, because I was looking for if there's an exception, do the do, right? And I'm going, where is it telling me to do the do?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay.
Just implied when there's an exception in that code. When I had started down this road with transactions, I was actually looking at there's another form of this where you actually have to do your SQL connection first, and I was actually going down that road. I had all this SQL transaction in place, but I could not establish my SQL transaction connection. So I was asking Andy about that, and he basically said, "You're going down a road you don't need to go down." And because we looked in help, and sure enough, in help for SQL transaction, you can actually use any table that you have in your data in your analysis, which then means it comes from a connection that you have. So that's all we have to do is trap our connection and get it here, rather than establishing a whole new connection. Well, what that also lets us do is if we're working with SQL tables that are not in our analysis, and we're going to be working directly through SQL code for insert, update, deletes, those kinds of things, then we have to start with a SQL connection. But when we do the regular H adds and modifies, we can just use the connection that we have in our analysis.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah,
Any other,
David basically
sure.
said it's like a try-catch.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a nice implementation, and as we've been saying, it's
Very
very
clean.
clean.
So
And,
clean that it was like, ooh, almost went right by me.
Oh, that's when you look at
and
the first
it's
time,
so
you
clean, and
think the
then
guys didn't do any error checking.
Yeah, that's what I was
right.
thinking. I go, how the hell did you get down there anyway? Okay.
Yeah. And this was actually all code that I had before, and I just reworked it simply enough. This was the code that I was using, right, without transactions and without the one exception in. And so to retrofit it for one exception in, that was so simple. Just do the one exception in, and then whenever you got to do, how are you going to handle your error? And then to recap then on the transaction, I just started it here, and anytime I'm finished with it totally, I just do a commit or I do a rollback. It's those three statements that we're working with. And
I'm
that's
blown
it.
away. Thank you.
Without having to know anything on the back end with SQL Server. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt there.
Not a problem. Let's go back to the delete button. And you'll notice all I'm doing here is I'm making sure that I have a record that's selected. And if I do, then I'm saying, yes, do you want to delete that record? And then all I do is I'm actually going to do a strikeout on the font for every single column that I have in the table. And clearly I don't need to do every column. I could do just the ones that are visible, but I chose to do
Can
every
you do
one.
that as a loop then?
And then,
Can you just loop through and do all the tables with one, like a single call of some kind, or
all the tables are all the rows,
all the columns?
all the columns. Yeah, I could, because they all share the same table and they all show the same row. This is the only thing that changes here. So if I know I have 5, I could do a 1 to 5, and 1 would become X and 2 would be X. Yeah, I could do
Because
that.
that's like an array, right? So
Yeah, more or less it's like an array.
cool.
Sure. So I set that the strikeout to true, right? And then when we're in this code again, when I come to the strikeout here, so if it's false, right, then I'm just going to add it Otherwise, I come down here if it's touched, and I'm going to modify it or delete it. Okay. And the adding is exactly the same. Trying to see what we're doing. Description. Yeah, that's why I reworked this, because it's on the OK button as it would be anything else. And so I just, I'm doing my validation here that the description and the phone number is required. I post a message with both of them if neither of them or none of them have been filled in. And since it's a memory table or not, we just do a table add line. So whether it is a memory table or another table, we just do table add line. So nothing's different here. It just happens to be a memory table. So that's kind of a nice, easy way for doing parent-child relationships without ever having to save the parent first. Now, I have another application where I'm doing parent-children, and what I do is every time I come in knowing that it's going to be a new record, I actually add the record, and I add it as a blank record. And so now everything that I'm doing on that form under the OK button is always going to be a modify. Because now what that lets me do is with the blank record, and then I fill it in, and since it's a modification, then I have the primary key already, and I can go adding my children. And I think what I would do is wrap that in a transaction. That way, if you cancel and you've not saved or put any people information in the parent, and you've added children, you could roll that whole thing back. So 2 different ways of doing that. I kind of like this because I'm not even writing anything to the database to the very end. But, you know, as usual, WD gives us multiple ways of doing something.
Just one thought about you could do the transaction log. But once you start a transaction log, you must try and keep it as short as possible. Otherwise, any other tables, updates, or changes and deletes is not going to happen for the other.
And that brings up a good, that's a really good point, because I was working with the transaction, and as soon as I added my people, just the person, hadn't processed the phones, I then went into Navicat, wouldn't matter, SQL Server, and I wanted to refresh and look at all my people records, and it just stayed there. It would not refresh. It was just hanging until I actually did the commit, and it updated everything. So you're right. We want to keep that as short as possible. That's a good point.
This is Stuart Chrysler.
Any discussion, questions on this?
There is a function HTransaction start and, you know, end, cancel. You used a different set of functions. Is there an advantage to one versus the other?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I did. I haven't even tried the other one, so I can't address that. Maybe I will look at that next. Sorry. In fact, let me make a note to myself, and it might just be another good one to do. Okay, we're off we're back into version 17, because this is an app we're doing in 17, which we'll move to 18. And this is a couple things in here. It's a practical use for me with planes. Now, yes, I took the approach of using planes in here, and I very well could have done internal windows. The effect would be the same. I chose planes. It was just quicker and easier for me to do that just by doing the up and down arrow to get to the different planes, which I'm going to be pressing my up arrow, and you'll notice that the planes are now changing. Doing internal windows, it's nice as if you have 10 different areas of your program, or the window here. You could actually have different developers working on different windows of that, because they're internal windows, where a plane is just one window. So it's only one developer who works on that at a time. So this was good for me to use. but it could also be, like I said, an internal windows. So let's run this. And what this is used for is we want to give our users the possibility of being able to select a report or reports, and also to be able to have a data filter. And what was nice with this, with the reports, is we don't have to have our menus keep getting larger and larger and larger. And every time we'd add a new report, we'd have to add a menu choice. We can actually just make a change to our database. So we come here, and we've got a filter just for filtering our reports. So I want to look at all attendance reports. So here's all these. All these reports use the same query, which is kind of nice. So let me run number 15, and I'll show you what we're doing. And now we come in, and we're actually doing our data filtering in here. And I'm just going to look for citation number 4. Here's our record. It's just our test data for right now, but this also is utilizing our tagging that we showed last week, where we can tag all of them, untag them, then only print the ones that are tagged. So we'll do next, and here is our output that we can let the user select how they want their report, whether it's a destination, preview, printout, PDF, those kinds of things. So we'll print this. So here's the one report that we've just selected. So let me now go back and select a different report. I want to do 9. Now, like I had said, all these reports use the same query. However, this report actually uses an additional parameter that the other reports do not use. And so what we had come up with is we can actually store the name of the parameter and the value in our table here. So when we run this report, and let's see, yeah, I'll do 4 again, and I do next. There's our data. We'll do next, and I will do a print of this. You'll notice now that it's a different report, okay? And let me show you then how we just implement that. Go here. How we implement that additional parameter. Here's our usual priming of the parameters, like we normally do. And then what we're doing is we're coming down here, and I'm, well, the first thing I did is I'm grabbing the source name. So I know for this table what my query is. So I can just grab the name. That way I don't have to store it in that parameter in that database field that you saw. And then my script is actually equal to the source name plus a %1. And then I use the string build, and I replace that %1 with whatever was stored in that field where it said param_contempt equals 1. And so actually, let's run this so we can see that happening. Attendance. Fine. We'll do 9, and that's got our parameter equal 1. And let's do next. Do 4. Okay. Now our script now equals query attendance view dot %1, as you saw. Our parameter is query report listing that script for report equal contempt, param contempt 1, and you'll notice it's param contempt 1 again and param contempt 1 again. This was just testing that I could actually have multiple parameters in that field, and we just do param_contempt equals 1 colon param_contempt equals 1 colon. So every parameter can be colon separated. So this is just for testing purposes. Otherwise, they will not be multiple of the same. And so now here's my script. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take every occurrence of the colon, and I'm going to replace it with a carriage return and that source name again. So now, in fact, let's go look at script. Here's what it translated. Each of this those 3 times, it actually created these 3 lines for me. So it's just as if we would have typed it in, and I can do execute code, and it's now primed those that parameter, or those parameters if there were multiple. Sorry, that happened in the stopping event.
Wow, that's crazy.
Anyway, that's it's good, right? And this kind of is a play off of my dynamic business rules that we have in the class and the examples. It's pretty much anything that we can store in our table, we can just execute as if we had code in there. And so this is nice, right? Because every report uses the same query, but you may have different parameters based on the report that you're running.
Powerful stuff.
It's really powerful. Yeah, that's really
There's your
neat.
SQL injection happening.
And excuse me?
It's like SQL injection.
Yeah, exactly. With it, let's not get too carried away though with that, right? You're right. You're right.
You don't let that
I-
part out to the end user, because if somebody has to figure that out and you've got a very important database, you have to be careful.
Yep, you do. Yep.
Oh, thanks, Glenn, for creating a hole for us.
Well, it's not exactly whole, because there's some things that wouldn't make sense if you just ran it in
Yeah.
here. But that brings up a good point, because if those of you who do have that dynamic business rules thing, especially when we're looking at, well, actually it's in the web service example that I have, is we allow passing these kinds of things up to our web service, but we never allow an insert, an update, or delete. So yeah, we could do that here too. Yeah. Good point.
Because that's
just limit whatever could be done.
Because as soon as somebody gets the hang of it, it might not be total, because it's a little bit more powerful than SQL scripting injection, because you've got the whole WLAMage behind it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, you do. So, any questions on that? For those of you, if we use the planes again, let me just go up. Our plane 0 is the base plane, so whatever's on 0 is what shows through all the other planes. So that's why I've got my previous and next button. These buttons next to it, they're just for testing purposes right now. And then we actually come in to the wizard here on plane 1, so you never even go to plane 0. And then as we go forward and backwards, we go next, previous, and we never even go back to plane 1. Now, what's also kind of neat that I figured out, or we're using in here, is we may have different reports based on different queries. And so we'll be displaying different data in the table. So what we've also done is, so plane 4 is kind of like for our most used reports. So any other reports that we're going to use that doesn't use the same data, what I've done is I've tucked them over here on plane 10 and plane 11. And then through code, let's go down to the next button. Then through code, because here's also what's happening is when we store, let me run this and explain. I don't think I'm seeing it here. Let me see if I'm still. That was the issue why we crashed them before, because that, let's see, that virtual machine there lost the internet connection. So let me bring it back up. Sorry about that. We're waiting for that. Okay. Okay, so when we're in here, one of the things we're storing, let me see if I'm even showing it. I'm not. One of the things I'm storing, although we can see it, take a look at the bottom left of the window here where it says we're on plane 4. We're actually storing the plane that we go to. So if I know that I have a different set of reports, and maybe I can show these here. We don't even have planes assigned to them yet, though. It would be plane maybe 10 that would be down here. So we not only store the parameter, we store the plane that it goes to. So any other report that would use plane 10, we would say use plane, the 10 would show up down here. And then, here we are, the next. And then here, sort of 4. I'm looking to see where my plane statement is. It's in here. I'm actually grabbing the title. Oh, here we go, right here. My window dot plane is actually coming back from that query. So we automatically know from our metadata that we're storing there what plane to go and display. And so instead of plane 4, it'll go to plane 10. And then when you would do the next, it would then go back to plane 5 because that is the one that would have the output for the report. So we slide things in and out of here, depending on what report
what you're
running.
saying is you can actually change planes on the fly based on.
Yeah, it's kind of powerful.
Wow. Hmm.
Yeah.
They were on the wrong plane?
Some criteria. Now, what's also kind of neat, and I just realized that I had some of my buttons disappearing, and I didn't know why. Well, what I said is the code behind the button said my plane or myself dot plane, so I was actually moving the button to a different plane. So, which is really cool if we stop and think. Now we can have controls that we can actually move to planes when we want to have them. Instead of just being on plane 0 and showing through, we could actually move them.
It might be a good idea to just show the people how to check where the controls on what plane is where.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So, thank you. We double click get the description. Here's the description of the button. And if we go to GUI, it says what plane it is and actually how we can select it here to put it on a different plane. And the other thing that we can do, and granted this is back in 17, but if we go to Tools, Options in the environment, we can, I think if that's here.
Oh, crazy.
Planes.
Wow. Makes it
more visual. We can actually put another area out here that shows our planes.
And
what we're working with.
And the hierarchy on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can you move controls?
Planes are really cool. But again, don't forget, we could have each plane here could have been an internal window, and we just swap it out with one line of code
from one plane to another, right?
And the effect would be the same.
So there's some advantages. Yeah. So there's okay.
Yes.
No. No. The ones that I had done by mistake. Yeah, there is
the planes. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Comments? Concerns?
That's tough. I've used the planes quite successfully, and it made my programming infinitely easier. And the other way to go,
I think they're ideal.
Sorry, the other way.
They're ideal for wizards.
Yeah. Instead of using a tab and hiding the tabs. The other way to move from one plane to another is using a page up and page down on your keyboard. Then you can see each plane was there. There you go.
Yep.
The challenge that I have found with planes, and I come out of the Visual Fox Pro world where we have excellent encapsulation of controls, is if you want to put like a save button on plane 2 and a save button on plane 3 and a save button on plane 4, then you have to name them separately.
Yeah.
as opposed to my thought process, which is you would just call it save button and it would know that it was on
Right.
plane 4.
Now, the one thing you could do is you could have a super control with a save button in it, and then they all the buttons themselves still can have the same name. It's the super control then that is
Yeah.
named
That's a workaround
differently.
for it.
I will have to try that. Thank you for the suggestion.
Or put it on plane 0 and then you hide it when you don't want. But you know those things. Yeah. We just don't have that fine level of encapsulation, I think, like you're mentioning. Well, that's all that I've got.
Wow. Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome. Glad you guys all showed up this morning.
Any questions before we stop the recording and move on to Wolfgang? So Glenn can